Ta-da!
Yes, we're recording. Brilliant.
Boom.
Can you hear me? I don't know if we were sort of talking over each other accidentally because it's cutting out a bit.
I can hear you.
I'm not sure. Okay, that's fine. Did you hear me talking about hummus?
No.
Oh, okay. I think there was a bit of a cut out. I was just talking about how if you can hear crunching, it's because I'm eating hummus on breadsticks because I've not actually had any lunch.
I've not had any lunch. I'm just living off chocolate and coffee.
Another thought I had was for every podcast, the intro music could be different. Same kind of vibe, sort of chilled out, lo-fi. I quite like the idea of having like a different kind of little tune every week, intro, outro.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that tune that we had last week. We're trying not to sing this week.
Oh yeah, no singing, no. Shall we do a little intro? Hello and welcome to Something Near the Centre, a podcast about politics, economics and current events. I'm James.
And I'm Will.
And today we're going to be having a chat.
Yeah, again.
We're recording this on the Monday, the night before, so Sunday night. Boris Johnson did his 7 p.m. announcement that millions tuned in to watch. Millions got confused by, although me, an intellectual, understood it. And so, well, in 10 minutes' time, Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, is going to be doing his second address to the Commons in 8 months, all about the plans that's been set out in a 50-page paper, go into more detail about what he rambled on to us in 10 minutes last night, basically. Will?
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Second time in 8 months for an address. And this is his first on coronavirus. We're 7 weeks in.
Right, yeah. So could you maybe explain for the listener what's the difference between like an address and just standing in Parliament and saying we want to pass this legislation, or a PMQs? What's so significant about an address?
Prime Minister will have to come into the Commons every Wednesday at 12 for Prime Minister's questions. But an address is a special announcement that the Prime Minister has to make. So like Theresa May did loads on Brexit. So this one, the last one Boris did was on Brexit again, talking about how he has to extend. Or I think it was on the election, I'm not quite sure. But this time he's requesting an address to talk about how we're going to get out of lockdown. And so he'll make the announcement, say all his spiel, present his 50-page document, and then MPs will ask him questions on various bits of the document.
Firstly, do you think it's a good idea? Ease the lockdown a little bit, give people a bit more freedom. Secondly, was it clear enough? Third, I guess, how do you feel about the United Kingdom not being united on this?
That's a good question, that final question. So I think it's now, as just normal people, just regular people, it's great to hear now after 7 weeks, and now it's been 49 days we've spent in lockdown, that now we're getting a roadmap. There's a clear light at the end of the tunnel. However, if I was in charge, I say I'd extend it for another couple of weeks to make sure the R rate keeps further going down. And his address yesterday, I thought he shouldn't have done it, to be honest with you. I thought he should have made the announcement today in the Commons so he could properly detail his plan, because that's what he had to do. Lindsay Hoyle requested him to. And I thought that's what he should have done, to clearly demonstrate, right, here's the 50-page plan, here's the 3-point plan that we're going to do, so no one is left in the dark and confused like today. So you can go visit one grandparent, but you can't go to work, but you can go to work, but don't take public transport, but go on your bike. Everyone was very confused today. I think he should have done a proper announcement today.
Yeah, okay, I get that. And also, I've heard people saying how if you'd have done it in the Commons, it would have been properly scrutinised.
Exactly.
But then the issue with that is, even if it was in the Commons and it was properly scrutinised, the government have still already set out the plan, and then people would have thought that that was the policy anyway, regardless of whether it was critiqued or not. And then you'd have it critiqued in the Commons, the government might change things, so one day you'd be allowed to meet up with someone, the next day you wouldn't. So it could have even added to even more confusion if they hadn't just set out an address. I don't care what you think, this is the rules, rather than then having it critiqued and challenged and changed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I think even with the announcement he made yesterday, if he hadn't have said anything and just, here are some of the rules, and then the proper announcement came today and it faced proper scrutiny, I think that would have been a lot better for just like the public's mind, because I know a lot of people were very confused last night, and a lot just like, it was kind of like a Vicky Pollard moment of, yeah, but no, but no, but yeah, but, like, that's what it was yesterday to a lot of people.
There's lots of boxes to tick, basically, isn't there?
Yeah.
Whether you can go in or out. So, can you work from home? No. Are you in a certain set of industries? Yes. Can you work safely? Yes. Right. Go to work. If any of those are no, then you can't go to work. Do you have to tick every box, or is it literally just if you can't work from home, you should work? See, now that is unclear. And yeah, and also you're allowed now to at a 2 meter distance to meet up with, you know, maybe a member of family or a friend, and only one person, and then you can sort of talk from a distance, maybe go for a walk outside. And I guess that makes sense because if you are at a distance, you're less likely to pass it on if you're in open air, etc., etc. But and I was listening to James O'Brien this morning, as we've discussed on the podcast before. Of course, brilliant, because he is something near the centre. And what was being said is, firstly, if both my grandparents live together, then surely me seeing one of them is the same as me seeing both of them, because if I do by chance pass it on, which is unlikely anyway, hence why we've been given this, you know, extra freedom, why does only one of them being there matter? Why can't, you know, I guess it would be difficult if you had maybe two families meeting up, just because maintaining the distance for the whole of that might be more tricky. But surely just one or two people doesn't matter. And the second point that was raised, which I thought was really interesting, is what if you and a friend were walking together, you bumped into another friend? Is that allowed if you all maintain your distance, or do you have to refuse to talk to your other friend and sort of brush them off and say, no, you must not break the lockdown rules? You know, because I can't imagine people doing that. And obviously, you do often in small towns like where I live, you quite often bump into people. That's going to be difficult to enforce.
But I also think we've gone about it the wrong way as well, how we're all divided now. About how Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have completely different rules to us. That also adds to the confusion. So, like, what if you live on a border town between Wales and England? Which rules do you apply to then?
But yeah, you are right. If you live near a border, or, you know, between England, Scotland, Wales, Scotland and Wales, England or Scotland and England and Wales. Well, you know, if you live in the sea, but yeah, it is a good point. Now I come to think about it, there is, you know, isn't as clear as I initially thought, but I still think the majority of it was relatively clear. One of the issues I have with it is I don't know what was so difficult about, you know, why it couldn't have been postponed as an announcement before you could get all four nations on board with it and their respective leaders. I think that was
something that they needed to do, is to get a consistent message across. Like, Northern Ireland, Scotland are still using the stay at home and we're using stay alert. That's a separate issue of what stay alert means. It's so vague.
No, it's not. I'm sorry. Stay alert.
Stay alert.
Yeah.
So what?
Social distance.
Stay at home.
The virus.
Stay alert is just not good enough.
It is. Well, if it's not good enough for you and then you catch the virus, it's natural selection. Stay alert is very clear.
Boris is coming.
Oh, right, blimey. Right, I'm going to put the radio on.
Listen to the announcement and then go to immediate reaction.
Hi, so it's me in the edit. Whilst Boris was making his statement, I had my microphone muted and my headphones weren't plugged in, so I couldn't hear what Will was saying. But I noticed he was making a few little comments, and I thought a few of them were quite funny, so I've left them in for you. Will doesn't get any answers because nobody was listening, but there you are. Enjoy these.
Is that 2 meters? Who would want to swim in the lake of the sea? Unless you want hypothermia. I've noticed it doesn't say anything about going to see, like, even in step 3, going to see friends and family. I wonder what they're going to do with that. Hey up, James, you're going back to school. But what I'm thinking is, so July is probably the most least active month you'll have in school. So you've got another... Boris, I want to know when we could do this podcast without the inevitability of the Wi-Fi dropping out, and I want to do it person to person. Can we do that? When can we do that? Please.
I'm a bit surprised, just in a sort of sense of parliamentary practice there, I thought this statement was going to be to clarify all the uncertainties, when actually this is just a non-pre-recorded version of everything that he's just said.
I think all the confusion now is going to be tackled in the scrutiny of it. But this was always going to be organised from the fact that he made his statement. So matters of legislation always had that he was going to announce yesterday always have to be addressed in the Commons, because obviously it's got to be up for scrutiny. Government's got to be transparent. Blah blah blah.
He's talking about national flexibility, and how you sort of want to be able to target certain areas, but then he also said how it should only diverge for a short amount of time. And so we are now, England is now diverged from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Yeah. So by saying that, is he sort of forcing their hand a little bit? Because he's saying we shouldn't be diverged for a short time?
I think so. Yeah, I think that was kind of a message. But what I immediately thought of that is that regions then? So is that like the whole northwest region?
Potentially.
Like London's been the worst affected.
Yeah, exactly.
But like, what about deepest, darkest Cumbria, where there's 2 houses?
The regional lockdown obviously has pros and cons. Obviously, it's good because you can specifically target a certain area, and then you'd be able to have sort of a net freedom, but of the whole country, but a small area that is most affected. But then the issue with that is so for example, if they shut down the northwest, what's to stop me driving into Birmingham? And so that's the only issue. I don't know how you do that, and whether you'd have to have sort of like a certain number of restrictions on driving distances and number plate recognition, but then it gets all quite surveillance-y. You must not leave your county, and then it's Big Brother. What's essential, what's non-essential. Well, yeah, exactly. 1984, when it's actually 2020. It could be contentious. Now, he sort of started off by talking about exercise. So we've now got, obviously, as we knew, unlimited exercise. Slightly cleared it up now. I could play football with a friend, but only one friend. And so, like I was saying earlier, if another friend came along and wanted to play, we'd have to say no, despite all three of us being 2 meters apart all the time. Which is a bit strange.
I think one thing that people want to know, when can they go see properly friends and family?
Well, it's going to be much later than just a singular sort of meet-up outdoors, isn't it? It wasn't clarified, but it's also not a priority at the moment. I get that it is a priority for the individual families, but like easing the lockdown, as a whole, so everybody gets a little bit more extra freedom, is potentially like a step in the right direction towards that thing. If you're in an at-risk group.
One thing I see is, so as a person who's doing their exams next year, what do you say to going back to school in July?
I was trying to think about why it was reception year 1 and year 6. That's the earliest stage of development for a child, right? In school, is reception in year 1. So if you miss those key years, you're just going to end up with the class of 2020 for year reception in year 1. You're just going to end up with lots of disadvantage, like a whole year that's missed out on so much.
I think the main goal is obviously childcare and getting people back to work, because you can't work if you can't have someone else round to look after your kids.
High school pupils are more likely to be able to homeschool themselves, right?
Yeah.
It's a bit you're older, you can have more independence and you're more capable of that.
I want to know about your situation.
Yeah, so I know lots of people in my year who really are struggling to learn from home, but that's not really anything new. So my point would be, I can understand why year 12 isn't prioritised, just because we are young adults, right? We should be capable of this. And I know you do need the support, but not only would year 13 exams be a test of how intelligent we are, but it's also our ability to be independent. Mm-hmm. So I think that can be something that's taken into consideration with results, just because you get a lot of people who struggle, which is a bit of an issue, but then you also get a lot of people who just haven't bothered. right? So people who are normally forced to work with teachers are now, oh, I've not done my homework, put me into detention. Oh, wait, you can't. Like that, you know. So I know lots of people who are getting really complacent. So year 12s and even year 10s are, so year 10 is 15, right? You're 15 in year 10. And
Yeah,
then
15.
year 12, 16, 17, right? So we can be left home alone. We are competent. We can make ourselves lunch and survive a day whilst our parents could go back to work, right? Year 10s and 12s aren't a priority. Despite the importance of the exams, we can look after ourselves and we can teach ourselves, whereas in the really young students who are holding parents back, then the most important of the youngest should be focused on, which is reception year 1.
I would think if I was in your situation, I'd want to get back as soon as possible.
I want to get back as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Definitely. But I understand why we aren't the first to go back. I think we'll be the next group after.
Yeah, you should be a lot sooner than the whole of the school. It's like I need that teacher contact to learn studying from, because I did a bit of studying at home, like there's some of the work I got, and it was hellish. Properly go, look, can you just look over this bit? That would take instantly, whereas this one took an hour or two. And it's nothing a knock on the teachers. It was just they had how much work that day dealing with 5 classes.
One thing I was going to bring up, I've just read my notes, something I haven't heard this in a long time being said by the government. Now, I'm going to admit I haven't listened to every single 5 p.m. conference, but I haven't heard the reiteration of self-isolate the whole family if one of you has symptoms.
Yeah, they've not done that for ages, have they?
I hadn't heard that for ages, and then Boris Johnson just mentioned it in the address to the Commons. So I guess that was just to reinforce, yes, you've got more freedom, but this doesn't mean you can still go out and about if someone's ill, which was good, but it just reminded me of the fact that I actually haven't heard that being said at all. Do you want to just talk about the government's whole handling of the crisis? Yeah, we did it a little bit last time.
This is what we've been building up to, because I remember you were earlier on in the week, we're going, I'm fed up of this now, I've got to have a big rant. I wrote it down yesterday.
I haven't written my rant down.
I'm going to say.
Go on then, you've written down your rant, Will. Just go, hit us.
We were told by the newspapers and by the government that the estimation for this would be 20,000 deaths, and that was the best case scenario. But that was what we were told by all the papers. Now we stand at over 32,000 deaths, which is higher than Italy, and we have 2 weeks advanced notice of this virus coming, and we have geographical advantage as well of being an island. Other geographical advantages, New Zealand, Australia, they've dealt with it really well. They've locked down their borders straight away, and you look, coronavirus is pretty much gone out of both countries, and like you can go to the hairdressers, you can do whatever you want to do there. We should have immediately, when that happened, only let UK nationals in. Immediately. And I just feel we had that big majority complacency of just getting Brexit done, going everyone patting themselves on the backs, and we failed to realise the bigger picture. Our restrictions were too little too late. Only now, if you come into this country, you have to isolate yourself for 14 days. And that's not even going to be in place to the end of May. It's 7 weeks into a lockdown. This is far too late. Why weren't we doing this right at the beginning? I can understand why we didn't put lockdown in until we did, because obviously it hadn't affected us that bad. But why didn't we just recognise earlier and curtail restrictions down once the Italians started getting bad? What's also annoyed me, Boris said 2 weeks ago that we're going to have transparency in this government. Why doesn't he, as the leader of this country, the guy that's in charge of it all, do the press conferences every day? For 11 days, he's denied the press a chance to offer him questions, only if they're pre-arranged and by the public. The guy has to be held account for this and has to be at the forefront of this. I know it's not good politically, but if you want to say, I want a transparent government, that's what you've got to do. You've got to be making these addresses. It's 7 weeks in. This is his first address about coronavirus. Why wasn't he doing this 2 months ago, 3 months ago, when he just left it to Matt Hancock? I know he's the guy responsible for it, but he is the main guy. He's the guy responsible for all this. And yet he's just playing that whole big majority complacency yet again. And then yesterday, confusing yet again, mixed messaging from the whole of the government saying, right, you can only see one member. Then Dominic Raab saying you can only see 2 now. oh, by the way, you can go to work on Wednesday, not today when most people have gone to work today. I mean, we haven't handled this remotely well. And even for the NHS now, 37% of doctors aren't sufficiently protected with PPE. And we had a chance to bulk buy with the EU. But we will forever be the government that prioritises Brexit over anything, over our personal pride, over what's right. I just feel we've made so many missteps along this way, and we've cost lives, and we've cost our free. We could have been out by now properly, or on the way there, and not just announcing restrictions today. If we'd acted sooner and not had our big majority complacency, rant over.
Well done, Will. I did write down a few things there, just to sort of talk about. Boris Johnson not making a statement, I agree, is something that needs to be done, but more importantly, not speaking to the press. Public questions are pre-recorded. The public are not professional journalists.
He can control what questions are.
Government. Yes, exactly. So I don't think that's right.
It's not transparent at all.
No. I also think if you're talking about transparency, then why don't you just have the quad, right, of government, which is senior cabinet ministers, Raab, Sunak, Gove, Hancock. So they're like the quad, and then you've got Boris, obviously, as the PM. So I think you should have the quad, the PM, Keir Starmer, and then the leaders of all the devolved parliaments and you're talking about transparent government, get all of them together and have a new cabinet.
So like a sort of like wartime cabinet.
Yeah, exactly like a war cabinet, not just having the bloody transport secretary and the secretary for sport and culture in the cabinet meetings. You should have a coronavirus cabinet of important key figures in Britain, right? Regardless of party. And then you can get a collective idea on this, and so you would end up with the leader of the opposition to hold the government to account. Now, obviously, the government needs some autonomy, and you don't just want Keir Starmer poking his nose in at every possibility.
No, and he has to point out the places where they're going wrong. You did it right with the care homes.
Yes, exactly.
I'd admit you should have done that earlier. But then I also saw something about people saying Starmer's just asking the simple questions. Surely simple questions work the best.
It's also the simple questions, the ones that need answering the most.
Exactly.
Because if you don't want to ask about something really specific, a simple question would be, what are you going to do about care homes where most people are dying? Yeah. You don't want to get into specifics.
Which is what I always felt Jeremy Corbyn's problem was he always asked the specific question. Open it up, like, what's he going to do about care homes? And then delve deeper into that as well. But he needs to speak and have daily questioning every day, in my opinion. Because we need to see what he wants to do, and we need to scrutiny on that to improve. And I feel we have lacked that scrutiny for so long.
That's why I think this coronavirus-style cabinet would be useful, because you not only have the heads of other parties there to sort of say, 1 second, that's not a great idea, but you'd have a more collective responsibility of everybody together as the leaders. So then you'd end up with more of a consensus, and it would be more of a group decision. And so that also would make sense for, okay, the government doesn't get ultimate control, but then they also, in the worst possible way to say it, but they have someone to share the blame with. And so I don't know why right from the start for this they didn't Sadiq Khan wasn't allowed into Cobra meetings, but I think that you really should have a much wider.
It should be a whole bipartisan effort.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas you can point out holes in it, such as, and it may force the government to improve on that. However, you're also working together, and especially as we're not all on the same, singing from the same hymn sheet now. So Nicola Sturgeon says you should never adopt the Stay Alert message because it's too vague.
Yeah. So at the moment, using your analogy, Scotland is on Hallelujah and we're on Kumbaya, right?
Yeah.
And actually what we all want is Jesus rode a donkey into town, right? Although maybe we're on Hallelujah because we're having a lockdown being eased.
My song would be Help. I need somebody help. Why am I singing it again? No, bollocks.
So, Will, I noticed that you were singing, and as Rick Astley would say, so you didn't give me a great deal to use today, but this is what I could get out of it. Right, so it turns out I don't, despite quoting Rick Astley, and it turns out when I edited Will singing in over the Beatles, I got a copyright strike from whoever owns the Beatles music rights. So that wasn't very fun. I hope you enjoy the rest of the show. without that little musical interlude. See you later. You only did one little verse.
Things will only get better. I sang 6 words before.
Onto our critique of the government. So,
Yes.
Cross-country comparisons first. They are difficult to make, but also,
Yeah.
regardless of, maybe the demographics and whatever it might be that affects coronavirus and its impact upon the population, the actual responses of the governments that can be looked into and response times. So, like you're saying, how Italy had a head start. Now, I'm not sure, sort of in January time, Brexit was sort of clouding our eyes a bit just because nobody was really doing anything then. But once it got into late February, March, and other countries were starting to see cases pick up. Now, I don't know if it was the kind of British sense of stiff upper lip, it'll be fine, let's not overreact until we have to, let's keep it all very measured. And it was that kind of approach. The government didn't want to be seen to fearmonger. And obviously, now it looks stupid to say that, but I remember, back then, loads of people were still saying, oh, it's just the flu. That attitude of the public and sort of the wider, the media environment would then have sparked so much criticism if we'd have gone into lockdown early. So I think the government sort of hedged its bets there and thought, we'll wait until we have to. But then I still think they waited too long, even when it would have been fine to do it. So as soon as Italy went into lockdown, if we'd have gone into lockdown then, not only would you have reduced the R rate, which is what the lockdown has done, but you'd have reduced the amount of people who would have had it too. So the R rate would have gone down, and the spreaders would be fewer as well.
I think if we'd have taken it, if the government would have said, no, this is a serious thing, this could have happened to us, lockdown's potentially here, and it's going to kill a lot of people. From when it started in China, when Hancock was doing those emergency statements on what we're going to do, if we took it a lot more seriously from then, people would have understood why we went into lockdown far sooner. Yeah. It's that what I said to you on the 13th of December. Big majority I was really worried about because of big majority complacency. And you see that with Boris when he went into checkers having crunchy breaks and not properly discussing it.
I really don't understand that. Because I've heard a lot, and I do believe Boris Johnson works really hard. And I can understand that you would want a holiday kind of, after having, just becoming Prime Minister, negotiating Brexit, fighting a general election, getting Brexit through the door. You'd think, bloody hell, give me a bit of breathing space.
But then you see a new disease, possible pandemic on the way. Oh no, it'll be fine.
Another thing I wanted to say was we recently celebrated VE Day. Okay, on Friday. This is recorded on the Monday. Lovely, wonderful, national pride, patriotism in its best way, genuine pride in the country and the country's achievements. It was lovely, but it made me think. Okay, who do we really celebrate for VE Day? It's the soldiers, but also Boris Johnson's hero, Mr. Winston Churchill. Now, Churchill's quite interesting because, as you will know, Will, the Second World War was 1939 to 1945. And Winston Churchill became Prime Minister in 1940. My point with that is, you see a lot of people, reporters of the government, newspapers, etc., and I had them messaging me. I have a political Instagram page, and I post some things on there, and I had some Conservative supporters popping up and saying that I shouldn't criticise the government now because they're trying their best and everything. So my point is, okay, we celebrated victory in the Second World War because of the government's competence to win. Winston Churchill, who won the Second World War, arguably for all the country, was certainly an incredibly important part of the victory, ousted Neville Chamberlain because he was useless and he was going, we were going to lose the war.
Exactly.
And so my point is, why can't I criticise the government? If nobody criticised the government in 1940, we would be speaking German right now. So my point with that is, why can't we criticise the government now? It's all, we're in a time of crisis. If you look back at newspapers from the Second World War, they were incredibly critical. Not only Chamberlain, who was then ousted, but Churchill, who was seen as the saving grace. And yet, he was still criticised. And that is good, because it's not like, because we're criticising the government, they are distracted by this. because they have specific people, media advisors, etc., who will read the criticism and say, right, this is where the public think you can do better on, this is where scientists think you could do better on, this is where the media think you can do better on. And so then that gives the government a new focus, because I can imagine handling the coronavirus crisis is going to be very, it's a very hands-on thing to do. And so then if you've got the media saying, well, hang on a minute, these people haven't got any money, or hang on a minute, these specific people haven't got PPE, or whatever the issue might be. The care homes thing was blown up in the media, and it's also the government want to tackle issues that do get big. So not only will it highlight issues, it will make them want to try harder and to push further and to be really persistent. We are, at the end of the day, we're talking politics, and it's not just about governing a country, but it's also about maintaining a good image, and you don't maintain a good image if you're doing a bad job, and the bad job is pointed out by the media and the public, etc., etc. And so I really don't understand why people are either blind to the government's mishaps and think we've done the best possible job, which we definitely haven't, or people who are sort of say we must abstain from criticising the government.
Yeah, and it's like someone said to me, you should always support the government. No, I'll do what the government tells me to do, but I'll always point out where they're going wrong and what they need to improve on. That's the only way we're going to get through this. If they're just doing a horrific job and thousands of people die, I'm just going to be oblivious to that? If I then criticise that and say, look, I think you need to do this a lot better, because then we get out of lockdown a lot sooner. They go, yeah, that could be a good idea. We'll have a go at that.
People say, how can we criticise the government? We are just members of the public. Well, firstly, it's members of the public who are being affected by their actions. So I'd like to think I've got a little bit of authority. I'll be voting in the next general election. So I'd like to think I've got a little bit of authority. And finally, they're talking about making inter-country comparisons. If it may be a civil servant, right, from German government could criticise the British approach, then surely I can. Because if there is a better example of what could have been done, then I can look at that and see, okay, why haven't we done this? If Britain was the best and there was loads of criticism, I can understand that, maybe then it's going to be less helpful. But because there are so many other better examples than us, then they could easily criticise the government. So why can't I look at their approach and criticise the government? So if you forget about their actual rate of infection, but if you look at their actual speed at which they took things, the policies they've since implemented, rather than just the specific details, but the just general level of success that could have been achieved. I just want to say I feel really bad for Matt Hancock, because I know he's not done a perfect job, but I also think he's going to get hung out to dry as a...
Yeah, he's the fall guy.
Which I'm really sad about, because I really like him and I think he's really sweet. Right, anyway, Will, let's move on. Donny T, Donald Trump, Mr. Trump, what's going on? You're the America expert. I'll hand it over to you.
Trump's economy is doing awfully. He's bailed out Wall Street, but didn't bail out Main Street. His handling of this, he said it would go away, but now we're now approaching 80,000 deaths today. The figures haven't come down yet, but yesterday it was 79,528 deaths. It's soon to top 80,000. But it's interesting to see how Republicans are now starting to turn on him, how normal Americans
definitely
are. I've generally run out of words to describe how they're handling this now. But the best one I came up with was willful ignorance. The man said on Friday, it will soon go away without a vaccine. If you look at it, the rate of infection in America still is 25,000 a day and has not dipped once in the past 2 weeks. Still not properly past the peak. So Georgia the state, it was the first to partially reopen, wasn't it?
Which is incredibly early.
They've seen their coronavirus cases go up by 40% this week. I think America's been proved that it's now a flawed system. Like federalism, the whole economy is a flawed system.
It is. Especially with the healthcare. Just because Public Health England is quite known for being a bit bureaucratic and slow to respond and kind of really liking to have a bit of the control in England. And so one of the issues with PPE was that, and testing, Public Health England is a bit bureaucratic. Things are slow to get around. There's lots of middle management, lots of things that have to get passed through. But the good thing about that is, especially initially, the tracking and the tracing, the deaths all get put into basically one big database. Whereas with the US, because it's lots of private independent hospitals or different firms and healthcare through insurance, etc., there's no one centralised body to help organise and distribute things. So whilst it was slow for PPE for Public Health England. Now there's still issues with it, but there is more out there, right? And so you have a centralized response that can then push from the center outwards or from the top down, whereas because you have a federalist system in the US, and the same is mirrored in their healthcare system, because smaller bodies have got autonomy. It doesn't work then, because you don't have one centralized approach. And while devolution is good in the UK for certain things, when you're tackling a national crisis, whether it would be coronavirus or a war, everybody has to be singing from the same hymn sheet. And that's not what you get with the American system. But they'll never be told. They'll never learn.
Now I think he's realised that his re-election hopes are in jeopardy. And you notice how he's not doing any more press briefings.
Yes, well, exactly.
I watched the press officer, and she was, and I didn't necessarily agree with her or what she had to say, but she was so much better than Trump because she didn't flip-flop, blah, blah, blah.
No.
She stayed on message.
She was better than Trump.
A toddler could be better than Trump. But,
I know, it's unbelievable.
But he stayed on message.
So if you can hear a little bit of newspaper rustle, I've just got a little extract here from the Sunday Times about Trump. Well, I won't read it all out, but I'll just bring some source statistics out. So the headline is, Trump spins the wheel and US holds its breath. While voters worry about easing lockdown rules, President chasing re-election seems keen to kickstart the economy. Now, that already should sort of bring a few little alarm bells, just because, as we were discussing, Britain's only just easing its lockdown a little bit, and we are by no means the greatest example to follow, but we are way further ahead through the kind of peak and the trajectory of the virus than the US is. And so some statistics are 15% of Americans are without a job now, which is the highest number since
numbers.
Yes, the highest number since the Great Depression, which is which is unbelievable. I'm just going to quote from the article. Perhaps in response, Trump has increased his rhetoric, seeking to shift the focus onto China. On Wednesday, he described the pandemic as the most serious attack on America in history. This is worse than Pearl Harbor. This is worse than the World Trade Center, he said. There's never been an attack like this. Could have stopped in China. It should have been stopped right at the source, and it wasn't. How can you link coronavirus, which is just a disease spreading, to, an attack and a bombing, which is crazy. And then 8 million tests have been conducted so far. And so when you think about the population of America and sort of how many tests have been done, that is not very many at all. What's their population? About
327 million.
Right, we'll say 320 because the maths works out. 80 million would be 25%. So, 2.5% of the population. And then finally, some statistics about election and sort of the public perception, if I can spot them. There they are. Approval of Trump's handling of the crisis has slid, with the latest mammoth poll showing that 42% say he's done a good job versus 51% saying he's done a bad job. Now, I don't know who the 42% are, but they are mental.
That will be his base.
Yeah, well, that'll be his core support base, but which is hugely high. It's amazing how many people he's basically radicalised to believe in is supporting him.
But I genuinely believe he's in quite a lose-lose situation now.
I really hope so.
If he opens the doors now and says, right, you're all allowed to go back to work, which he's itching to do because that was the only thing he can bang on about being good. Well, supposedly good was the economy. And like employment figures, well, I know he bangs on about the stock market, but the actual economy is something different. Then if more people die because they contract this disease, which is a strong correlation to that, you're going to have people going, well, you've killed over 100,000 people because of your policy of, let's get the economy back going. And then if it keeps lockdown going and the economy is going to do worse, yes, people aren't losing their lives. I can't believe I'm even drawing a comparison to this. But more people are going to get annoyed and more annoyed because they can't get a job. And the economy gets worse. There's 33... I was listening to Bernie the other day. There's 33 million people unemployed in America right now. 10 years of job growth has just gone.
Exactly.
And you cannot get that back in 4 months.
You're right. The 10 years of job growth, right, and that is important to remember, doesn't mean it's all Donald Trump. The economic growth and the employment growth that Donald Trump often cites is just a continuation of a trend that happened post-financial crisis through the Obama administration, it's not like he's really done anything special.
When he inherited the presidency, the economy wasn't on an upward trend.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't in the doldrums that
No.
The horrific state of what Obama healed it in. It was quite a good point. More people getting back into jobs. He's further given it a sugar rush, and more people have gone into a job.
What Donald Trump has done is Obama was cycling up a hill, right, to actually restart the economy, and then just as he came over the crest of that hill, Donald Trump's just jumped on the bike and then taken all the credit for it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you've got to remember as well, with things like policy, sometimes it's slow to have a development and a knock-on effect, right? So lots of the hard work that Obama had done might only have actually come into fruition in Trump's administration, because obviously things have a knock-on effect and things are slow to, build up and grow. It's a bit like a snowball effect, right? But now that trend is gone, people will be looking elsewhere for hope. And so you think, right, this has happened under Trump. He's been useless. Let's see what happens with geriatric Joe.
Yeah. Well, if I was him, I'd be lambasting him. Look at what he's done. He's let how many thousands of people die. He didn't bail out Main Street. How much unemployed? It's all on his watch. I know he can blame the governments, but the buck stops with him. And that's what I'd be doing right now.
There's a certain amount of competency that should really be expected. And this is where Joe Biden should really come in and say, the thing is with America, there's not like a parliamentary system of opposition, is there? Like the House of Commons. You have like a prime minister's question.
But it's not the president.
No, well, yeah, exactly.
So it would be like Pelosi.
At the end of the day, isn't going to be as high profile, is it, than prime minister's questions Keir Starmer absolutely ribbing.
Which
Boris.
is what it has been doing at the moment, because Boris hasn't answered a question.
No.
But that's another rabbit hole we'll get down.
That is another rabbit hole, or a can of worms, or a kettle of fish. You choose your naturalistic metaphor. Do you want worms, fish, or rabbits? Do you want cans, kettles, or holes?
I think we covered America there really well.
Yeah, I think that's good. I was going to talk about Donald Trump, if we remember, sort of back into the kind of Rocket Man era that we referenced in last week's game, was very proud of his diplomatic attempts to disarm and denuclearize. That's not a word, but I'm going to coin it. To denuclearize North Korea. Now, I'm just looking at an article in the Express because I thought I'll choose another newspaper that isn't really the Times, the Guardian, or the Telegraph. And so, whilst the Express isn't something near the centre, it was the first article that popped up when I Googled this. North Korea has been seen, and I've got it right in front of me, you could just Google it, aerial shots and pictures of potential nuclear testing. And so, Donald Trump's big diplomatic triumph over, look what I've done with North Korea, stopping them from being nuclearized, and it's just fallen to pieces. So his legacy is going to be nothing. He won't have a legacy.
Yeah.
So you have Obama was big social reforms and repairing after the financial crisis.
I do think Trump will have a legacy of.
Yes, but he's not leaving anything positive behind, is what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, what he would say is, I'm playing devil's advocate here. So you say, well, you look at what I did before. I by no means agree with this. Look what I did before. There was record levels of employment. What was it? The Dow Jones reached 20,000 points, which is something that's never happened before, all because of me, and it was just ruined because of the virus. But then your counter argument is, yeah, your handling of that virus was appalling. You've left us in this state.
Yeah, and it's a bit like Tony Blair, right? Tony Blair, brilliant prime minister. He was definitely something near the centre. And I'm going to keep mentioning it. But yeah, his legacy is the Iraq War, and nobody wants to mention anything other than him being a war criminal. And so that's the thing with Trump. It doesn't matter what you've actually done in office. I mean, Tony Blair was prime minister for 10 years. Donald Trump with this doesn't have a legacy, because it's not like he could even claim a tiny thing, as was bringing up in the article about North Korea. The Chinese trade war hasn't done anything, right? And he could cite the economic growth, but then Joe Biden could just say, we started that, mate.
Should we go on to worst news story?
Yeah, we can do.
My worst news story came on Friday. It came from tabloids, so the Express, the Mail, the Sun, when they all said, I'll give you a happy Monday, pubs could open soon, garden centres, the first stages of freedom, and lockdown freedom beckons. To which I say, you're giving people false hope and a false sense of this is going to be over soon. I think the press has to be realistic with people. Like a lot of people said yesterday after Boris Johnson's speech, that's it. Whereas like the Times are going, lockdown could continue until June or July, and saying some people thought it's all going to be over yesterday. It quite clearly wasn't. It's just really, really poor reporting.
Definitely.
And poor being realistic. So yeah, that's all I have to say on it.
Well, another issue you would get with that is it's not just you give people false hope, but you also give people a false sense of security. So, if you read an article that says lockdown could be over on Monday, and then you sort of think, well, then surely it can't be that bad, and you start getting complacent, etc. And so, not only is it false hope, but it's also then misleading, and people are going to...
Which is why I stress to all listeners...
All three of you.
Yeah. Oh, mind you, we had 49 views or something like that.
No,
we generally have.
I haven't checked. I didn't want to think about it once.
No, I've checked every day. I've literally checked every day. All I'd say is to anyone who's listening to this, please, please, please do not read tabloids. We learn about this. Your first lesson of politics. Don't read tabloids.
It's just gossip, really, isn't it?
To what I'd say, my rule has always been the rule of three. So I've always gone to like the BBC News for the facts. I've read a left-wing opinion on it, and I've read a right-wing opinion on it, and then I've made my own mind up. Don't just read one news story, and definitely don't read tabloids. So your worst news story, James.
So for my worst article of the week, I sift through the Guardian opinion articles. Now, before you think this is a huge attack on the Guardian, you've got to remember this podcast is still something near the centre, and I think the Guardian is a great newspaper, it's really respectable, it's a reliable source, etc., etc., etc. Really good journalism, but lots of the opinion articles are the kind of left wing that isn't really very helpful, right?
Can I just say, on the Guardian, Anywhere But Westminster on YouTube is one of my favourite series that newspaper does on the internet.
Brilliant. Right, okay. So yeah, this isn't a huge attack on the Guardian. Now, last week I did do a little silly joke about how worst news article of the week was literally anything on the Guardian. The only issues I have with the paper are in the opinions sections when it's just people are just unreasonable at the end of the day. And I think comment sections often they're not the actual editorial line of the paper, so they are more there for maybe entertainment and to stir up a little bit of thought, etc., etc. Right? So my article is by George Monbois, and it is called "Airlines and Oil Giants Are on the Brink. No government should offer them a lifeline." As the headline suggests, George is saying oil producers and airlines and stuff like that are all going to go bust because of this, and we shouldn't help them out. Now, I had a number of issues with this, but the main theme of the article was, hey, look, we've got a chance to become more sustainable by letting these guys die out. Let's do it. And the environment is a weak spot of mine. So whilst I do favour free market economics generally, not obviously 100%, but like a slightly less regulated, slightly lower tax economy, it's with the environment that I really think regulation could be stepped up. Monbois says we should either nationalise these industries as they're going bust, or let the market decide, because that's what this government usually favours, sort of a less regulated, more market orientated approach. But if you let the market decide during this crisis, then you would have huge numbers of unemployment, you'd have so many different issues. And so that's why the government has had to do the furlough scheme and jump in. And so really now is not the time to let the market decide. And I know Mr. Monbois, you are being slightly facetious with your point. Now, the reason I believe a bailout would be necessary is because if you didn't, it wouldn't curtail the airline industry or reduce oil consumption. All you would end up doing is reduce the amount of consumer supply, and so the prices would get pushed up. You would have the really large firms who could survive, then they just become the dominant forces, and they would actually just have much more market share. And so you just end up with the antithesis of surely what the Guardian wants is huge multinational corporations with way too much market share over a difficult to enter market sector, pushing up the prices. Who's that going to hurt the most? The lower earners, which in left-wing politics, it's the ordinary people, if you want to use such words, that you want to protect. And so they're going to feel more sting, because if there's less oil producers, then the prices will go up, which means that public transport and petrol and energy prices are going to go up. Now, I do get the fact that we need to push the market to a place where it develops its own sustainable energy, but by letting half of it die out is just not the right way to do it. To sort of take him to the point where he said nationalise it. Well, if you were to nationalise it, you'd put huge levels of government spending, right? And that's spending, not like loans or anything, when we're already spending loads of money we're not going to get back. But you'd have to buy it.
Interest rates are down, though, to
well, they are.
5%.
But government debt is government debt, right?
That's very true.
So you'd have to buy it, right? Buy up the industry, but then you'd have to invest loads, and then you probably wouldn't get very good return on investment. So instead, you could just regulate once this is all over, and regulation is free. It's all about carrot and the stick, right? If you say to the industry, hey, look, guys, if you cut your carbon, or for the oil companies, if you invest in clean energy, then you can have tax breaks, or then you can have extra government funding. We'll put an extra 30% onto what you put in. Stimulating growth. Something in the centre, let them survive, but then also increase a little bit of government spending and a bit of market regulation. So then after you've sort of helped them survive, you push them into the direction you want them to go in.
Yeah.
God, Will, I love being a centrist,
So then, the game.
I'm quite excited about this. I've stolen this game from a podcast I've listened to. The game's called Risk a Fifth, okay? So I will give you a certain category. So this is a completely arbitrary category. So I could say countries by size in square miles, okay? And so the top 5, you'd get a point for the first, 2 points for the second, 3 points for the third, 4 points for the fourth, and 5 points for the fifth. So the reason it's called Risk a Fifth is because you don't want the top result. You want to come lower down. So if I said what's the largest country in the world by square mileage, everybody knows it's Russia, right? But not very many people would know the fifth. And so the more risk you take by going for a more obscure answer, the more points you get. If you guess the sixth, you get nothing at all. We'll just start off, okay? Risk a fifth, longest serving post-war prime minister.
Oh,
you can go through them. You can talk to me. I can't, obviously help you out, but you can share that with the listeners your line of thought.
Yep. You've got Thatcher.
Okay.
That'll be probably the longest. That's 11 years. Then Big Tone, which is 10 years. Cameron's 6. Does 2 terms count?
Yeah. Just longest time serving as Prime Minister. So it's just the collective time in office.
So Wilson did from 64 to 70. That's 6 years. Plus another 2. That's 8 years. Macmillan was 57 to 64, wasn't he? So that's 7 years.
I like you're actually thinking it through rather than just giving for a random stab.
Macmillan.
Harold Macmillan is your fifth. Is it you guessing that is?
Yeah.
5 points.
Actually.
Yeah. Right. The next one.
So that's 5 points to me.
This is a bit of a memory test. This one's quite easy. I probably should have started on this one. Most recent chancellors. So the first most recent, the second.
Ritchie, Sanjid, Hammond, Osborne, Alistair Darling.
5 points.
Come on!
Do you want the 6th, 7th, and 8th most recent chancellors and 6th, 7th, and 8th longest serving PMs, just out of interest?
I can do the chancellors one. I can't do the PMs.
It was Darling, then it was Brown, then Clark.
Yeah.
And then Macmillan, Major, Attlee, Cameron.
Yeah, Attlee.
So he was 7th. So GDP per capita, this one's really difficult. Like I wouldn't have got this. Rich countries with tiny populations.
Exactly. So,
or tax havens.
One of tax havens. This is really hard.
This one is really hard.
Because if it's GDP, I'm going, America. That's
per capita.
Per capita, though. I'll go Monaco.
I don't think it's on there, no.
It's not on there? Bugger.
No, top 5, no.
Come on, give me the top 5.
Qatar.
Yeah.
Luxembourg.
Luxembourg was one of my thinking. Oh, Will.
Singapore.
Yeah, Singapore, obviously.
Ireland, because it's a tax haven, right?
Yep.
Really low corporation tax and all that. And then Brunei. 6 was Norway, 7 was UAE, and 8th was Kuwait.
So I was going proper tax haven, not a
Yeah.
lot of people, lots of money. But I was thinking Luxembourg. Luxembourg was going to be my second one.
Yeah, that would. Well, sorry about that. Well, right. States in the US by population. So far, you are on
10 out of
points.
15.
Yeah, 10 out of 15.
California is number 1. Florida, Texas, New York State. Ooh,
Let's remember, you don't have to go for a 5th if you're not certain. Just to point
that's
that out.
what I go Florida. Yeah, Florida. I'm playing safe.
3 points. Well
Three
done.
points. Go on, give me
Yeah.
the top 5.
California, Texas, Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, Georgia. That's the top 8.
Yeah, I was thinking Pennsylvania because they have 20 electoral college points.
Good way of indicating the population, isn't it? You're halfway through, and you've got 13 out of a potential 20 points so far. So you're doing really much better than I did last week. Countries by oil production, so the amount of barrels of oil per year that they produce. Risk a 5th.
Trump always says USA is the most producing. I know Russia's up there as well. Middle East has to be up there.
Just the Middle East in general.
like Qatar, UAE, Kuwait as well. Iran, you could say Iran. Oh, I'll go Qatar.
Should have played it safe, Will. Russia would have got you 3 points.
Russia would have got me 3, but no!
USA, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Canada, China is the top 5.
Canada!
6th is Iran, 7th is Iraq, 8th is the UAE.
I'm nowhere near. Why
No.
was I thinking that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's because Qatar is oil rich, but because it's a small country, it can be rich quite easily. Hence why its GDP per capita is the highest. Next category is post-war election government majorities, right? So the size the government has in its majority straight after a general election. I want the year.
Number 1's 97. Then 2001. 1983 is also another one. Thatcher's second term. You got the Falklands War and the SDP split the Labour vote, and Labour were too left wing. And then I've got 2019 as well. And then Tony Blair's 2005. That was like 68. Boris Johnson 2019. No,
That was 8.
8.
Yeah. Do you want me to go through them? 97, 2001, 45, 83, 87, 59, 66, 2019. Are you banging your head on the microphone?
Yeah, I am. Been so stupid.
Yeah, I know. So when you were talking about
59, I forgot about 59 because
that was
somehow
sick.
extended after Suez.
Yeah,
And
I know.
45 as well. I should have just gone. It was
83 would have been brilliant for you. 4 points.
I should have gone 83.
Will, you're still on 13, but now you're 13 out of 30.
I'm not over half.
The game is risk a 5th. If you're not certain, you might want to go for a second or a first or a third.
I should have gone Thatcher.
As most people should. Always go Thatcher. That's my No. She was not something near the centre. No, I'm joking. Don't go Thatcher. Now, Will. So the penultimate round. This is easy to get the top ones, but difficult to think of an order, right? So risk a 5th. Newspaper by circulation.
Is it daily circulation or weekly circulation?
It's monthly circulation.
Times. Screw it.
Times is 6th.
Bugger!
You ready? Right, I think that there's 2 newspapers that you will have forgotten about. The Metro's the first, the Sun's the second, the Mail's the third, the Evening Standard fourth.
The Metro!
The Mirror, the Times, the Telegraph, the Express, the Star, and the Eye. Now, the reason I thought, when you were saying the Sun, it is the most bought newspaper, but the Evening Standard and the Metro are free. They make money from advertising, and then they're given out for free. Evening Standard in London, the Metro, all the train stations. This is why I thought this was kind of easy, kind of difficult. You'd completely forgotten, about it because they are free and they don't crop up in shops. So as we discussed last week, I'm listening to an audiobook all about the British Empire. So it got me thinking, this is a history question, empires by size. Risk of fifth is so difficult, honestly.
Ottoman Empire has
That
got to be up there.
I'll give you a hint, Will. It's 22nd. I remember that because I looked at it.
22nd?
Yeah. It peaked in 16 something and then just shrunk ever since. You've got to think, even if you just got 2 or 3 points here, like that would be genuinely really good. But at the moment, you are. It's so difficult that you are looking to be set for 13 out of 40. Yeah, risk of fifth, empire by size.
The Roman Empire.
I mean, it's not in the top 8.
No, it's got that idea. The British Empire.
You get 1 point.
Yes!
I didn't know many of these. British, obviously. The Mongol Empire. Now, that's Genghis Khan.
That's Genghis Khan. I was thinking Genghis Khan.
So, yeah. Then the Russian Empire, just because, I mean, they've already got most of it anyway. Which, you wouldn't have thought about it, really, the Russian Empire. But Russia is huge anyway, so anything they add onto it, you know. The Qing Dynasty is in at 4. The Spanish Empire in at 5, because you've got to remember we were battling the Spanish to take control over, you know, all of the colonies and things. So at some point they were a huge threat to us. 6th is the Second French Empire. Then it's I don't know how to pronounce them, but they were in like the 700s, so 1300 years ago, and they were like Middle Eastern caliphates. So, but I can't pronounce them, so I'm going to try. I got a third of answers right, because 15's a third of 45, so I think you might have beaten me.
Come on.
Yeah, you beat me by 2%.
Yes! Come on!
How about we could both do each other maybe 3 rounds of risk of fifth, and then whoever...
One. Defend the indefensible.
Go on, how do we play that, Will?
So you get 20 seconds to defend a statement. We will prepare each other's statements.
I think more than 20 seconds, mate. Give it a minute.
30 seconds, because you're going to come up with something that's ridiculous.
Probably. We want to have certain things off limits so we don't offend people. On the sort of the scale of, why was Thatcher good for Britain? That kind of. Okay, that's fun.
Okay.
I like that, Will. Brilliant. That's for next week.
We're going to wrap it up now?
I think that might be a wrap. Anything you want to mention, to plug? I mean... remember, get in touch with us, email us at somethingatthecentre@gmail.com. Instagram is the same, something at the centre. No spaces, no underscores, no nothing, just something at the centre. Yeah, any last words, Will?
No last words, other than that was really enjoyable.
I loved it. I've had a great time. I don't know how long have we been recording for, Will? Like
2.5 hours.
Oh Christ! Think of the editing. This one's going to be more.
I'll leave you to that.
Yep. It's taken me hours, but it's all fun because I get to listen to myself talk. So we're finally down to about an hour. The more I talk now, the longer it's going to be. But I've done it, guys. Oh yeah, right. See you, Will.
See you in a bit. Bye, guys. God, that's so weird. It's all I can't go and say bye, guys.
Yeah, it's really strange, isn't it? How do you think it went? You've been listening to Something at the Centre, a podcast about politics, economics and current events. The show was presented by Will Turner and James Baker, and it was me, James Baker, who did the editing. Thank you for listening, and see you again soon.